Half a rep for double the gains. In today's YouTube video, I'm going to be taking you through the 1 1/2 rep method and the 1 1/4 rep method, and how this powerful method can intensify your workouts and potentially get you better results. I'm here with Marina, who's warming up behind me. We're going to be taking you through some of our favorite exercises and how to use this powerful technique. So come follow along if you want to learn some awesome ideas to upgrade your training and your physique. Okay, so first off, what is the 1 1/4 rep method and what's the 1 1/2 rep method? So Marina's here just demoing this on a hip thrust. So at the moment, this is a 1 1/4 rep. So really, it's just about doing an extra little pulse at the top. It doesn't specifically have to be a quarter rep, doesn't have to be 25% range of motion, okay? Now she's going to show you the 1 1/2 rep method. So it's all the way up and it's an exaggerated half rep. So it's a little bit longer time under tension with this one, and then all the way down. So it's 1 full rep, 1 half rep, 1 full rep, and repeat, okay? Nice one, Marina, just relax there. Cool. So when we add an extra half rep or an extra quarter rep, we're adding it within a specific range of motion. So we've obviously just gone over the hip thrust with Marina. We've added that extra quarter and half rep at the top of the movement. So what we're doing is we're spending more time at the top of the movement. So that's all it is really. It's a time under tension technique that's exaggerating a certain range of motion with an exercise. So with something like a hip thrust, the reason why it's a really good technique to add in is because we're emphasizing that shortened range of motion at the top of the hip thrust, which is the range of motion that the hip thrust tends to work the hardest. So we can add the extra quarter rep, which really looks like a pulse with a hip thrust, or the extra half a rep to simply exaggerate that shortened range of motion at the top of a hip thrust. So we get that enhanced contraction, we feel our glutes working a little bit more, and we just make it a harder exercise with the same weight as well. So there's plenty of exercises you can do this with, and obviously the idea behind today's YouTube is we go over a few of them. We're specifically looking at glutes today and how to add the 1 1/2 rep technique and 1 1/4 technique to glutes, and a little bit of hamstrings exercises as well. But there are plenty of exercises you can do this with. We'll probably do that in a later video and cover like some upper body exercises, but today it's all about glutes. So come follow along. We will share some more exercises now for your glutes and a little bit of hamstrings. So next exercise is a walking lunge. So we're going to start out with the walking lunge 1 1/4 rep technique, or it's kind of like a pulse at the bottom of a lunge. So as I've said before, this is about exaggerating a certain range of motion. So when it comes to the lunge, it's about emphasizing that hips flexed range of motion. So when your hips are in deep flexion. So what happens when your hips are in deep flexion, we actually get a little bit more focus on those low glute fibers. So any exercise that really stretches those glutes and loads in that stretch range of motion will tend to bias those lower fibers. So if you want to be building that glute hamstring tie-in, then spending a little bit more time at the bottom of your lunges or exaggerating the depth, so say like a deficit reverse lunge, can be a really great option. So we've got the 1 1/4 rep technique. The 1 1/2 rep technique, which we're going to show next, is just exaggerating the time under tension a little bit more at the bottom. I would argue it's a little bit harder than that pulse, that 1 1/4 rep technique, but then also we're probably getting a little bit more quads involved in this one as well. So really it just depends on what you're trying to achieve out of your walking lunges. So let's take a look at Marina perform a 1 1/2 rep technique with those walking lunges. So you can also use the 1 1/2 rep technique or 1 1/4 rep technique with squats. So just like lunges, squats emphasize your glutes in that bottom range of motion. So we're emphasizing deep hip flexion. Your glutes are working hardest at the bottom of that squat. So when it comes to that 1 1/2 rep technique or quarter rep technique, we want to be emphasizing the bottom. Now, that might not mean that you're lifting as much weight as you might do otherwise if you're doing like a standard repetition, like full range of motion. But we are spending more time under tension in that bottom motion of the exercise where our glutes are arguably most active or going to be worked the hardest. You can also, as we're about to show in just a second, with any squat variation. Now, we're just using a straddle squat at the moment on a belt squat machine. You can apply this technique to any squat you want, but in just a second, we're gonna show a 1 1/2 rep technique that will emphasize more quadriceps because we're using that extra half a rep at the top of each rep of the squat, where our quads are worked the hardest. So what we can do as well is we can use the extra half rep to make a range of motion of an exercise that's easier, i.e. the top of a squat is easier than the bottom. We can use it to make that range of motion a little bit harder, as well as obviously what I've just mentioned, which is about emphasizing that muscle a little bit more. So let's take a look at how to use a 1 1/2 rep technique with a squat to emphasize quads as opposed to glutes.
Relax.
Looking good.
Yeah, I can feel my quads.
So the final exercise we're going to go through today is a Romanian deadlift. Now, if you know me, you know I love a Romanian deadlift. Now, what better way to spice it up than to add an extra quarter rep or half rep? Now, I really like to add that extra range of motion at the bottom of your Romanian deadlifts. That's not to say at the top is a bad place to put it. So let's say you go all the way up to full hip extension, you add an extra little pulse at the top, get a little bit of a glute squeeze at the top, and then go all the way down. That's not to say that's bad, but because it's quite kind of a short lever arm, the barbell isn't really loading you much at the top. Instead, we prefer to think about this as getting you into a lot of hip flexion at the bottom of that Romanian deadlift. So Romanian deadlifts, at the bottom of the movement, that's where our glutes and our hamstrings are stretched most, and the muscles that we're stretching most, we're loading most here. Have a minute. So we've gone over a handful of exercises that you can use this technique with. When would you use it? Well, I wouldn't use it with your meat and potatoes primary exercise. Now, although you've just seen it with a barbell RDL, and I would regard that as a meat and potatoes lift, if I was using it with a barbell RDL, I'd probably actually be using that RDL more towards the middle or maybe even back end of a workout. I wouldn't be using that RDL in that way as like our first, second lift in that workout. So we would be using it more as like a secondary technique to like our primary exercise. So it might have been in that day, if we're using the RDL as an example, it might be that we start with a heavy squat type motion. So let's say a barbell back squat or a barbell box squat. We just use like a basic technique to say we're working towards sets of 8 to 10, relatively close to failure. And then it might be the exercise after that or the exercise after that where we might employ that extra half rep or quarter rep. Same with any exercise really. The only exception is if say we're pre-fatiguing hamstrings by doing some hamstring curls at the start of a workout. So you know I like starting with some hamstring curls to really warm up those knees, improve some range of motion, get a lot of blood there. So using an extra half rep or quarter rep with our hamstring curls is a great option right at the start, but besides that, we're using them more towards the middle or back end of our workouts. So hopefully you've got some ideas today how to use and integrate this technique into your workouts. Remember, like the video, make sure you follow the page. Any questions, drop them in the comments below. And if you like these kind of shorter, sharper videos like this, then let me know in the comments. You can send me an email at getmefit@thefitnessmaverick.com as well. I'll put all the links of anything we've mentioned or any kind of product in the description below as well. And we will see you next week.